Good morning, everyone. My name's Bill. I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing today, and set the stage for the different panels we're going to have throughout the day, which is focused not on the why of TOD, but more on the how and where. But this first part, I am going to introduce a little bit of the why of TOD. We're going to have this discussion on land use policy and urban form coming up with some of our visitors from out of town, and also connections. How do you connect transit to where people want to go, and also where people are starting from to get to the transit system to make that kind of connection? Mia Kang is going to be our luncheon speaker, talking about infill development related to transit. She's a developer from the Sacramento region. And then we're going to have a discussion about financing, infrastructure, and community facilities, which is not unique to transit-oriented development, but is also common with just any type of infill development, but is a major issue for implementation in many of the communities. CEQA streamlining and travel forecasting methodologies, because when in a context of being serviceable by transit, how we evaluate those impacts is different than maybe how we did it in the past when it was primarily a road system. We're going to recap today, and then tomorrow is focused on the agenda for San Diego. So today is a discussion of lessons learned, and then tomorrow, how do we take those lessons and apply it to San Diego? That includes a presentation about readiness for TOD. And how do you evaluate, or how might we evaluate what areas are ready and what areas are not ready in the near term, maybe in the midterm or long term, or how do you get them to be ready? And then the group workshop on setting that agenda for TOD readiness, which will be all input to the regional TOD strategy. I would like to introduce some of our guests. And for this workshop, we've decided, we thought it was important to bring some experience from around the country, because there are a lot of places around the country that have been at different stages of implementation of TOD, and many that are perhaps further ahead of us in terms of TOD development. Knowing many of the people here in the room, we've been talking about TOD for 30, 40 years in some cases. And so by talking to each other, we kind of developed the same TOD twitch. And so it's good to get some outside perspectives because as a person who I'm based here in San Diego, I'm a San Diego native, but I work nationally, it's very apparent that the issues that we think are unique to San Diego are not unique to San Diego. They're common issues in many metropolitan areas that are trying to reduce the reliance on just driving and providing the option of transit and other types of walking or biking related to transit. Also, as a housekeeping thing is, you'll see a map over there of the TOD system. And we have some dots that Liz, she's around here somewhere, there she is, that are green, yellow, and red. Just during the course of the day, take some of those dots and put them on their map. Green where you think there are near-term opportunities, yellow where they're midterm, and actually it's blue that is longer-term opportunities. And we'll just see how that evolves over the next day and a half. You have the introduction, the resumes of the panelists today, so I'm not going to go through introductions of each one. Let me just tell you where they're from. Okay? So me, San Diego. G.B. Arrington from Portland, who works nationally in TOD. Dina Belzer from the Bay Area, who also works nationally on TOD. Yara Fisher, who is with AECOM here in San Diego. Mia Kang from Sacramento, works throughout the state. Gil Kelly, currently in San Francisco, but was also the planning director of Portland for 10 years, and before that, Berkeley, and very much involved in the Pearl District. You'll hear from him soon. Bob Leiter, who is former here in San Diego, and formerly with SANDAG, very active with the other COGs and MPOs around the state. Jim Lightbody in San Jose and the Bay Area. Peter Park from Denver, and also an instructor at Harvard on planning issues, and currently working with the City of LA on their zoning code update, and the City of Austin. Jim Parsons, who's from Seattle and very familiar with the Puget Sound area and also Vancouver system. And then Al Rain. Al, over there, you're not wearing your Red Sox cap. He usually does. Well, you'll certainly tell when you hear him. He's from Boston. And he used to be executive director of Massport, which develops the transit system and the port also in Boston. And a long time ago, Secretary of Economic Development for the state of Massachusetts. He's with AECOM. And then Mike Singleton, Mike, with KTUNA here in San Diego, up near Normal Avenue. So anyway, so that's our group today. And you'll see that there's some white papers that are drafts. They're posted, several of these white papers, that try to introduce the issues. Hopefully some of you have read them, but if you haven't had a chance, certainly read them after today's session. And we want to hear your comments. And there is a lot of expertise here in this room of people who are experts in this field as well. If there's something you think could be added to them, let us know. They're going to be drafts for another month now, so we want to hear your comments through the website. Let's see. So, why are we doing this? Well, there are various reasons, but one that certainly has emerged in the last decade is to address issues related to climate change and trying to reduce the region's greenhouse gas impacts to the atmosphere, to the climate. As you know, much of the seminal research on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change has been done here in San Diego at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. So with the state laws now mandating a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over the next several decades, that is one of the major motivations of introducing alternative forms of transportation that allow people to have choices and options to move about. At least half of those greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation, which means primarily driving to fossil fuel, and that relates to land use and how land use and transportation work together. We know that a big part of the solution is technology related to automobiles and fuel innovations. So it's not just about transit or walking or biking, it's also about driving. Most people still drive and will. So it's a combination. And how many people have heard of the tragedy of the commons? Okay, good. About half of you. Probably the ones who went to planning school. So, or economics. Tragedy of the commons was actually a paper an economist, a British economist, wrote about in the 1830s. And it was this concept of this dilemma. The story is there's a field, there's the one field that the cows use to graze and eat. And everyone's happy, every cow's happy there. They're fine, there's enough of them, there's enough food, and it replenishes itself. Another cow comes in, wants to eat in that field. Okay, just walks onto the field. Okay, now there's a little less for everyone, but everyone's still pretty healthy. Another cow comes in. Okay, a little less. Another cow. Another cow. Another cow. And at some point, there's a cow or a few cows who start eating the grass, and the grass doesn't replenish itself. There isn't enough to go around. All the cows get weaker because there isn't enough food available. But still, the incentive for those last cows to come in is if they don't eat, they die. So they have the self-interest of going to the field, even though for the common good, that may not be the best solution. And that's a basis behind theories such as pricing to regulate access, to have apportionment of rights. For example, some cities allowed cars just to go to their center cities only if they have an even number or an odd number on their license plate in Asian cities and some European cities. Pricing, the tollways. But it also means you have to have options. So there is an option besides just having to go to that field in order to survive. So those lost cows may know where to go and can survive. Now you might think this is theory. You might think that this is an old story from the 19th century. But let's ask ourselves, do we have our own commons now? And there is the tragedy of the commons today. And we live it very often. So the purpose of transit, because sometimes, even last week at Lambda Alpha, I heard somebody commenting about, well, why would you invest in transit if only less than 10% of the people who commute take transit? Because transit is part of a comprehensive transportation system that gives people choices to make the whole system work. So it's not just to help transit, it's not just to help biking, it's not just to help walking, it's also to help people driving. And so this graph kind of illustrates that you're going well within the capacity of a freeway, but it's that margin, that last 5% that is the difference between a freeway that works or a roadway that works and one that's congested and does not work. And so transit provides an option for people to choose to take transit and relieve that 5–10% that might otherwise try to get onto the road system and create that. So something we should keep in mind. We also were curious about how San Diego compared to other places in terms of the percent who drive alone, percent who take non-automotive ways of getting about, and percent who take transit. And we're all right in the percent of people who drive alone. We should be lower, but it's about 3/4 of people drive alone to get to work. A quarter do not. Interesting, the cities that are just with us and below us on taking transit, about 3.2% of our people who commute take transit, are Salt Lake City, and we're ahead of Phoenix. We're ahead of San Antonio, which is a very similar city the size of San Diego, and Austin. But we're below Atlanta, which is known as one of the major sprawling metropolitan areas in the country, where some people say, well, Californians, they drive, they don't take transit. Well, we're below San Jose, 60% of Los Angeles. Los Angeles is almost as much as Portland. We're below Portland. And some people say, well, you know, transit doesn't work here because of our topography. There's too much topography and physical barriers to make transit work. Well, we're 1/3 of Seattle. Seattle also has a lot of physical barriers and inlets that you'll hear about, yet 9% of their commuters take transit to get to work. So there's a lot of upside for this region to take transit. Now, at first, when we put this study together, we were pleased because we were 3 times higher than Portland, and we thought, oh, this story about Portland is just, you know, it's just a story. And then we realized we were comparing it to Portland, Maine. So, so if anybody asks you, say San Diego's 3 times higher than Portland, and let them figure it out. So it's important that we have sustainable community strategy that tries to provide these kinds of options. And you've heard about the place types being an organizing structure to that. The question is, how do you make those place types actually work, actually happen as conceived? And there's a hierarchy to all this. There's the regional network. Then within the region, there are the cities and towns that have their own networks that are connected to the region. And then within a city and town, you have the communities that are part of that city and part of the region. And then within the community, you might have a district or a master plan area that is where the TOD is located. And so it's looking at how these different networks work together to have a sustainable system. One of the things that we wanted to talk about too was the notion of, well, what is a TOD? Because you hear different definitions. And especially about accessing TODs. You'll often hear about, well, okay, quarter-mile walk. You'll hear in a lot of the regulations, the programs from the FTA or the state, it's a half-mile distance. But we said, well, you know, let's look at it a little more refined. Let's look at it in terms of access and time. The average commute in San Diego is 25 minutes, just under 25 minutes. That's of all modes, including driving. Transit has to compete with driving in order to attract the choice riders, people who have the options of whether to drive or not. If you figure, okay, well, let's say it takes 5 minutes to get to a station, 5 minutes to wait for the bus or train, 10 minutes to take the ride, and then 5 minutes to get to your destination. That would be like the average commute. And then we have a system that can compete. And even if we're a little longer, we probably can compete because one of the advantages of transit is you can look at your emails and work on your games as you're taking the transit. But 5-minute access varies by mode. So 5 minutes by walking is about a quarter mile. 5 minutes by biking, for those who are not wearing spandex, is about 3/4 miles. And then 5 minutes driving at a neighborhood speed of 25 miles an hour is about 2 miles. And given the way our employment spaces are structured here, a lot of people would drive and maybe drop off another household member who's taking transit while they go off and drive to where they work. So it's a combination of looking at that and taking the strategies together. Regionally, we have 340,000 jobs within about a 5-minute access from these various modes to the transit stations that are planned by 2050. That's about a quarter of the jobs. And research has shown proximity to the job place, the destination, is more important than proximity from your home where you're starting. So it's trying to make that number increase by planning where we put our employment. So another way of thinking of transit and land use and TOD is what's that relationship between where people live and where people work? And here, historically, we've been looking at kind of transit stations one at a time as a facility within a community. And just look at that one, and then later on we'll look at another one. You'll see that some of the systems start looking instead at the transit system as a whole line, with each station being mixed use, but they have their different emphasis. Some are more job center, some are more residential, some are more commercial and entertainment, some are more institutional. But if you know, okay, these are the types of industries that are in the job centers along the line, these are the kind of wages those industries pay, to have housing along the line that's at a price point that's consistent with those wages, whether it's rental or ownership housing, then they reinforce each other, and it reinforces the real estate market. So if you're an employer, you're thinking, great, if I locate here near this transit station, a percentage of my workers can take transit. I don't have to pay rent for a lot of parking I don't need. If you're a homeowner or a renter, say, well, where am I going to choose to live? Oh, my job's over there, or at least one member of my household's job's over there. I can get there very easily, and I only need one car now instead of two. Those are the kinds of characteristics that you see in robust transit centers. But we still have the highways, and again, transit has to compete with the highways as an alternative mode or a choice. And then also some of the highways connect to types of job centers that are very low density manufacturing, warehouse distribution. There's just certain type centers that really don't lend themselves for a lot of transit ridership. So in establishing priorities, especially in these early years, it's something we should consider. So when planning for TODs, we're planning for market choices. Markets only work if there are choices so consumers can decide what's the best choice for them this year, this week, or even today. Because not all transit riders ride every day. Many ride just a few days a year, or a few days a week, excuse me. So it provides a vehicle, though, for placemaking. And you'll see from the examples, people have been using that attribute to help create and define a whole place, a whole district for the community. That means the importance of urban design and connections, variety of housing types, public spaces, all the amenities that create a place. Whether it's in new suburbs like Orenco Station in Oregon that was created as a greenfield development centered around transit, or existing centers like Brisbane's BRT, Bus Rapid Transit System, one of the more advanced BRT systems among developed economies in Australia, where they took the BRT system, instead of trying to create new towns, they took it right straight into existing activity centers, hospital districts, university districts, city centers. But with the introduction of the Bus Rapid Transit, it enhanced the capacity to build more housing and workplaces in those activity centers. Or the historic context in Europe, in Strasbourg. Very old city of 700-800 years. It's the parliament capital of Europe, and also has transit integrated into a context that's old. So there are different ways of doing it. But we also have our own success stories, which we should remember and we'll hear about today. And we're at a stage where at 3.5% of ridership taking transit, and seeing that Seattle's 10, Portland, Oregon is closer to 7, even LA is around 6.5. There's room to do better. So with that, I think we'll go to market readiness. Dina?